Hi crafty friends, it's Donna here from Donna is Playing Paper, and I have been busy with the Mediterranean Summer paper pack from Paper Rose Studio. Altogether, I've made, I think, 27 cards. Now I'm actually going to split the video into two different parts, and the reason is that I've got two different things that I'm going to be focusing on. To start with, we're going to continue in our series of card sketches. Only this time we're going to be doing 10 sketches with Australian sizes using both the paper pack and also the embossed cut-apart sheets from the Mediterranean Summer pack. You can see the papers here. There are 18 papers in the pack, 3 each of 6 different double-sided papers and a bunch of cut-apart sheets. These have been embossed, so the embossing on them ranges from just a little bit, in the case of those watercolory pages, to a really nice sheen over the whole of those vases, which really does make them look like glass. I'm also going to grab from my stash some background papers in some of the darker colours that I can see on these patterned papers. Please excuse my husky voice. I'm on the mend, but my voice is still a little exciting. Let's have a look at these paper sizes. Australian cards in general, and those throughout Europe and through Asia, are slightly taller and thinner than the American cards. You can see there the comparison of the two, and so we can choose to make some alterations to fit the sketches to Australian sizes. The first thing that I'd really like to say is that different doesn't mean bad. If you have to fudge things a little bit to change the shape of the paper that you have, and your sketch comes out looking a little bit different, it's probably equally as gorgeous. So don't stress too much about it. I'm just transferring some of the Australian sizes, incorrectly you'll see in a minute, onto the card. For my American friends, your sizes are already on that card, and the card size is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now I've written the right numbers, but I've written them on the wrong sides, so please just kind of reverse with me there. For this first card, I'd like to cut my red paper to exactly the size of the card, which is 148 by 105 millimeters. And then I'm going to cut my pink paper 3 millimeters smaller, which is 145 by 102 millimeters. That will give me 1.5 millimeters of border all the way around. Here's my first practical tip. I put tape on my cutter at the 148 and the 145 millimeter mark and at the 105 and 102 because those are sizes that I cut all the time when I'm making Australian sized cards. Now these two little scenes look like they're going together to be roughly the size of that front white panel. And so I'm going to use them as a pair. I'm going to double mat them on pink and then on the burgundy paper. Don't forget that you don't need to measure everything. Your eyes are powerful tools and that you can trust them. No recipient of a card is ever going to be as fussy as you are about your borders. One of the common ways that I eyeball things is when I'm cutting borders around little pictures like this. I decide how much border I'd like, stick my image down in the corner with that much border on 2 sides, and then cut the other 2, so that to my eye, all 4 borders are pretty much the same. And here I finally realised that I wrote the measurements on the wrong side. Another thing to think about when altering sketches is to decide which measurements matter. Often you won't need to do a conversion at all. Take these horizontal strips. I worked out how long they needed to be, 93 millimeters by my chart, so that I would still have that nice strip down the side. But the height doesn't really matter. If they're a little bit wider, a little bit narrower, effectively the sketch is going to be the same. And so I didn't bother doing a conversion. I left them at 1 1/4 inches, the same as the sketch. You can see the pieces of tape that I have on my cutter in this shot. The worst thing about double-sided papers? Looking at what you missed while you add glue to the back. These sentiments come from a pack called Rainbow Poppies Sentiments, and I don't have the packaging to show you because I just brought this one page with me from Japan. The rest of them are still waiting for me back in my crafty space in Tokyo. When I stick my feature panel down, the top is going to hang off the edge of my sideways panels, and it's going to flop down unless I do something to stabilise it. And so I'm using some scraps of paper to add 2 layers to the back at the top, which is the same number of layers that you see on those strips that are across the bottom of it. Now it's nice and stable and we can glue it down. Sketch number 32 is a really simple one, and so I'm going to add an extra layer at the outside. I want to use my white card base as the outside and then have two coloured layers inside that. So I'm subtracting 3mm and then subtracting another 3mm to get my two background sheets. I'm going to use this sketch sideways because I have this lovely watercolour background cut aparts. I'm actually not using the dimensions of the top square. Rather, I'm cutting down the element that I have until it's as close to the dimensions that I see there as I can. It's not going to be the same. If I was to go the exact same measurements, I'd chop off part of my image. So the sketch is just there to serve me. I'm not a slave to the sketch. The size of this background panel is not extremely critical. It needs to be longer and narrower than your front panel. From the next card on, I'm going to show you a chart that you can use to convert the sizes very exactly so that they keep the right proportions. But for this card, I just used the same width as I was given in the sketch, but made it a little longer so that it would definitely stick out the top and bottom of my front panel. So far we've had sketches that have not been very busy. Up to now we could fudge the measurements, but this sketch is much busier, and so if it pleases you, and you don't need to do this, you can work out mathematically how to change the sizes so that you've squashed and stretched the card to fit metric dimensions. And I've done the maths for you here, so let's have a little look at it. You can find the full typed out version of this over on my blog at donnaisplayingpaper.com. Let's have a look at the long side. The long side of a US sized card is 5.5 inches, and the long side of a metric card is 148mm. If we halve that, then we would go down to 2 3/4 inches, and you'll see that the measurement next to 2 3/4 inches is 74mm, which is half of our 148. And so I've worked out all of these millimeters based on what proportion of the full length they are. Let's work our way back up that long side to where it says 4 1/4 inches. You'll see that that is 114mm. Because 4 1/4 inches is about 77% of the full length of 5.5 inches. But if we follow across that line from the 4 1/4 inches on the long side to 4 1/4 inches on the short side, you can see that that measurement is only 105mm because that is the full width of our card. It looks a bit tricky, but if you just follow the chart, you'll end up with lots of pieces that are slightly longer and slightly narrower and will fit perfectly onto your card, giving you roughly the same visual proportions. Most of the time, you don't need to worry about these proportions. You can just wing it and it will look fine. And the other time that I would completely ignore the proportions is, for example, if I was to need a square. I would pick a size somewhere between the two on the sheet and make it a square, because at the end of the day we want it to look like a square. Anyway, let's get back on with the card, and you can check out that chart over on my blog later. We know what we're doing with the background piece already because we know the full size of the card. Next comes these two floral strips. According to the sketch, these need to be 1 3/4 inches by 4 3/4 inches long. That 4 3/4 inches will go along the long side, and so that comes to 128mm, and the 1 3/4 inches will make them 43mm wide. And I've used this chart to do that, and you can see that they sit on the card looking so similar to the original sketch. The front panel has dimensions of 3 1/4 inches high by 2 3/4 inches wide, so that will translate to roughly 87mm by 68mm. And then I've immediately ignored that and made mine a tiny bit shorter because I wanted my bouquet to stick out of the top of the panel. But it's absolutely possible to do it all using the strict measurements and ratios, should you so choose. For me, I like to have the chart as a handy tool. It saves me working out the maths every time, but mostly I ignore it and do what makes my heart happy. And after all of that maths, we probably need a little break. Luckily, this card sketch is exactly what we need. We have a large space at the top, 2 vertical stripes, and 1 feature element. When I have beautiful papers like this, one of the first things I look at in a sketch is I look for nice big spaces where I can put the beautiful papers. And so that's what I've done on the background. The other thing I look for is where I can put my sentiment. Often I stick it on the top, but in this case those beautiful horizontal stripes were the perfect place for it. You can see on the sketch that those bottom 2 strips are 3/4 of an inch wide by 5.5, which is the full length of the card. Rather than butt them up, I've chosen to stack them on top of each other. And because the exact height of these isn't going to alter the design, I've converted the length to be 145 millimeters so that it will run the full length of the card, and use the inch measurements for my height. Where that heart is, of course a heart would look fabulous, but I've substituted in one of the beautiful little counterparts. It's going to sit low at the top, and so I've carefully flipped that over so I can see where it's going to need the extra baking, added that, and then stuck it on. Nice and simple for this one. I have one more little practical tip for you, and that is to use a screen such as an iPad. You can take a sketch and using your 2 fingers drag it out until the height of the sketch is the height of your card, and then you can measure the heights of the other elements. And you can do the same for the width separately. I've done that in some of my earlier videos in this card sketch series, but I haven't done it in today's, but I still wanted to put it in as a tip. For this next card sketch, I got out my handy dandy conversion chart and started to write down the conversions. When I looked at that 3 3/4 by 4 inch rectangle, the millimeter measurements came out as 99 and 101 millimeters. And I don't know about you, but I called that a 10 centimeter square. That's certainly close enough for me. If you want to do the exact measurements, by all means you do you. This sketch has some of the background paper showing at the bottom, and then this lovely wide strip, and I've used the fruity paper for that. Again, I haven't been too fussy about the size of this one because it can move up or down a little bit in that front panel and it'll be fine. It's hanging off my 10 centimeter square, so of course it's going to need propping up at the back. That front white rectangle is 4 1/4 by 2 1/4, and so the long side of 4 1/4 came to 114 millimeters, and the short side of 2 1/4 came to 56 millimeters. The perfect size for this long slim vase and a little me-made bouquet of flowers from the glossy counterparts. Once I have the flowers where I want them, I'm going to hold them together with a piece of post-it tape, and then I'll glue the vase down flat and pop the flowers and leaves up with some foam tape. Most of these cards have been made from the sketches using background layers to provide borders for each section. But I'm going to make this sketch into a card with no background layers, and you can see the difference in the look. The areas are less defined, but you definitely save a lot on paper and on time in construction. So really, that is up to you. Once again, I've used my chart to convert the different sizes, and you'll notice that my floral panel looks a little shorter and wider than the one in the sketch because I've stretched it to meet the metric sizes. For this next card, I used my chart to convert the side and the bottom strips, but that top rectangular panel is a little differently sized because once again I'm cutting it to preserve my beautiful panel. I've cut the scripty thanks die and added that to the panel. I really like this die because it sort of sits around the image and lets it shine. I'm going to need to build up under the top right for 2 layers, and then I need to build up the whole top by another 2 layers to make sure that I've got everything level before I put my feature panel down. And as you can see, this is where I use up all of my little scraps. For this sketch, I've stuck with the 3 widths given in the sketch, and I'm just going to space them slightly differently. My feature panel has been cut from this gorgeous bouquet, and I've chosen a corner with a pomegranate because I do have a bit of a thing for pomegranates. I've backed that onto some beautiful burgundy cardstock, and then I'm just going to move my layers so that I have one in the middle and one sticking out slightly from the top and one from the bottom of my panel. That way it'll match the sketch. I'm using these embossed cut aparts for my sentiment. This second last sketch is a classic example of one where I used my chart for everything. It's far too complicated for me to work it out myself, so I just plugged the numbers into my chart. I've made my own bouquets from some of the flowers and leaves for the 2 side panels, and I've stamped the words "Thanks a bunch" in the middle. The original stamp has the words in a line, but I've previously done a little bit of stamp surgery on this stamp, and so it's already in 2 pieces, ready for me to stamp it on this rectangle. If I want to stamp it straight, it's very easy to put it back together, just using a little bit of spare card to get everything lined up nicely. These sketches have all come from Sandy Allnock's Operation Right Home sketches, and this is part 4 in a series. Finally, we have sketch 40. If you have a little look at the measurements, you can see that the top half of the background is slightly bigger than the bottom. That's up to you. Really, you can do that. You can flip it upside down and have the bottom bigger, or you can divide it in half. Honestly, they'll all look great. I'm making the simplest of bouquets, and this time I'm stamping the "Thanks a bunch" back in one straight line. We're going to have a look now at the leftovers that I have after making these 10 cards. As you can see, I have lots and lots of those embossed cutouts left. I have a bunch of smaller pieces of paper and some whole and almost whole sheets. I also have the cover from the paper that I can use because it still has some beautiful little rectangles of patterns on it, and the cover sheet from the cutouts, which I can use as a layering piece to prop up the layers of the different cards. And that's what we're going to do in part 2 of this series. I won't be using sketches. I'll be looking at different ways to use the patterns that you have on the papers to inform your design choices, and also some cards that use the paper up down to the tiniest of last pieces. All in all, we'll end up with 27 cards. I look forward to sharing that one with you too. I'd love to know in the comments below whether just giving you the chart and some broad guidelines was helpful, or whether you would have preferred the video to slow down more and give the individual sizes for each of the different cards I made. Let me know in the comments. Feel free to give this video a like, and also to subscribe if you want to watch out for that second video. What you're seeing now is a sneak peek at the cards we'll be making. Until next time, stay safe. Bye for now.